Elena stepped into the rooftop bar like she belonged there, shoulders squared, lips painted red to match the sharp tone of her confidence. Her heels clicked softly against the polished marble as she leaned over the counter and said, "Old-fashioned. 2 cherries." The bartender gave her a nod and she gave herself a small moment to breathe. It had been a long week of late meetings and ignored texts, and tonight wasn't about anyone else. She wasn't here to make connections, just to detach. When the drink landed in front of her, she turned to scan the room casually, not searching for anything in particular. That's when she noticed him. Tall, relaxed, leaned back in his chair with the kind of smile that didn't chase attention but pulled it anyway. He caught her glance and didn't look away. Instead, he raised his glass, silently inviting her over. Elena held his gaze for a beat before pushing off the bar and walking over. No games, no hesitation. She pulled the chair back across from him and sat down like she was used to owning her choices. "You always stare at women until they join you?" she asked, eyebrows raised. The man grinned. "Only the ones who look like they might challenge me to a duel if I don't." The banter was easy, fluid, too natural for strangers. He didn't give his name, and she didn't ask. They traded stories without any real substance, flirted without pressure, and laughed without expectation. Hours passed unnoticed, and when she stood to leave, he followed without question. They left through the back stairwell, coats draped over their arms, city lights bouncing off glass towers. Around them, they ended up at her place, not because it meant anything, but because it didn't have to. The intimacy was physical, wordless, like 2 people who understood the value of not making promises. In the morning, before the sun had fully settled, in the sky, Elena slipped out of her own bed and into a fresh shirt. She wrote nothing, left no note. He was still asleep when she walked past him, heels in hand, and shut the door quietly behind her. She liked it better this way. Clean. Done. Back in her world, Elena returned to her structured days, early wake-ups, color-coded planners, and client calls. She didn't dwell on the man from the bar, didn't let herself wonder about his name, his work, or what might have happened if she'd stayed. That wasn't her. Her world was efficient and forward-moving. Distraction was for amateurs. 3 weeks later, she stood in a glass elevator ascending toward the 35th floor of the Wellington Tower. Her portfolio was tucked under her arm, filled with design mock-ups, projections, and strategy notes for the presentation she was about to give. This was big. Landing the Warren Group account would mean national exposure, credibility, and a payout that would give her boutique firm the breathing room it needed. She had prepared meticulously, every slide rehearsed, every detail ironed out. She stepped into the boardroom 5 minutes early, as always, and began to arrange her files on the center table. The walls were sleek steel and glass, the room minimal but commanding, just like the man who stepped through the door moments later. Elena glanced up as footsteps approached. She froze, not because of his tailored suit or the confidence in his stride, but because she recognized him instantly. That same relaxed smile, the calm command of his presence. But now, no drink in hand, no bar, no blurred lines. He looked right at her, equally composed, and offered the barest of smirks. "Ms. Hartley," he said, extending a hand like they were strangers. "I'm Cole Warren, CEO of Warren Group. It's a pleasure to meet you." The words echoed through the room with a weight that twisted something inside her. Elena blinked once, then took his hand and shook it. "Likewise?" Her voice was even, her expression unreadable, but her pulse was anything but calm. The one-night stand had a name now, a title, and unfortunately, he also had something else. Her entire project's future in the palm of his hand. Elena kept her eyes on the screen as the presentation slides advanced, her voice steady as she walked the executives through projections and brand alignment strategy. Her team watched her from the corner, nodding at every cue. She didn't falter, not even when Cole Warren leaned back in his chair at the head of the table, arms crossed, gaze unreadable, but fixed on her with the kind of focus that felt far too familiar. She didn't let her eyes linger on him. She didn't acknowledge the way his presence seemed to sharpen the air in the room. It was business. Strictly business. She'd built her career on that discipline. Whatever had happened that night in her apartment was nothing more than a sealed chapter. Anonymous, momentary, and over. Except he was right there. And not once, during the entire presentation, did he look away. She ended strong, stepping back from the screen and thanking the board for their time. Light applause followed, polite and professional. Cole was the last to clap, slower than the others, his eyes still locked on hers. She didn't blink. She couldn't afford to. Afterward, as executives dispersed for coffee and follow-ups, Elena packed her laptop with mechanical precision. She turned toward the exit, but his voice stopped her. "You always leave so early?" She looked over, her shoulder expression neutral. "Efficiency," she replied. "Time is expensive." Cole smiled faintly and took a slow sip of his coffee. "Some things are worth spending it on." She stepped closer, lowering her voice just slightly. "Let's not pretend we don't understand what this is, Mr. Warren. I'm here to do my job, and you're here to evaluate that. Let's keep it simple." He raised a brow, amused more than offended. "Of course, though I can't shake the feeling we've met before." She didn't answer, just tilted her head and offered a cold smile. "I'm sure you say that to a lot of women." Cole didn't push. "Maybe," he said, "but you left an impression." She turned without responding, walking out of the boardroom with practiced poise. But as soon as she hit the lobby and felt the breeze of cool air from the revolving doors, her pace slowed. Something about the way he said it, an impression, unearthed the careful walls she had put in place. That night hadn't been a big deal. At least it wasn't supposed to be. And yet standing across from him again had disoriented her more than she expected. The unspoken recognition, the not-so-accidental pauses. Her heart shouldn't have reacted the way it did. Later that evening, back in her apartment, Elena tossed her heels by the door and sank onto the couch. She pulled the ponytail from her hair, let it fall loose, and exhaled as though she had been holding her breath all day. Her bag landed beside her, and she reached for her planner to jot down notes for the client debrief. As she flipped through the pages, her hand paused. She scanned the dates again, then flipped back 2 more weeks. Her eyes narrowed. She set the planner down, walked to the kitchen, and leaned against the counter. Her fingers tapped against the surface as her mind recalculated, then recalculated again. She pushed away and walked to the hallway drawer where she kept things like batteries, tape, and items she hoped never to need. The small box she pulled out was simple, white, and had been collecting dust for months. She stared at it for a long moment before unwrapping the plastic. The test instructions were brief. She followed them without delay, as if hesitating would somehow make it more real. Minutes stretched as she waited. The silence in her apartment grew thicker by the second. She sat on the edge of the bathtub, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the closed lid of the stick resting on the sink counter. When she finally stood and turned it over, the result was unmistakable. One bold line, then another. Clear, unflinching, positive. Elena didn't move. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. She just stood there, the test still in her hand, the buzz of the city outside muffled behind glass. No sound, no panic, no dramatic breakdown. Just stillness. A pause long enough for her to feel her entire future tilt in a direction she hadn't planned for. She slowly placed the test on the counter and braced herself against the sink, her reflection staring back with unreadable eyes. She wasn't ready for this. She hadn't even considered this. And yet, here it was. Quiet, irreversible truth staring back at her from 2 faint pink lines. Elena arrived at the office early, as she always did, dressed in muted neutrals, her expression composed, posture sharp. She moved through the conference rooms with the same precision that had built her career. Confident, efficient, untouchable. No one would have guessed that in her handbag, beneath a sleek leather planner and a perfectly sharpened pencil, was a folded slip of paper with the words "Positive Result" printed in a sterile font. She hadn't told anyone. Not her assistant. Not her best friend. And definitely not Cole Warren. That part she wasn't ready to face. She told herself it was because the timing wasn't right. The project was too important, and their history too blurred. But in truth, it was fear, quiet and unshakable. Cole remained professional, but something about him had shifted. He no longer brushed past her casually in the halls. He lingered, observed. When she paused mid-sentence in a meeting, to collect her thoughts, his eyes narrowed, not judgmental but attentive. When she stayed seated during a standing toast at a dinner meeting, water in hand while the rest sipped champagne, he tilted his head slightly. And when she declined dessert, citing a mild headache, he didn't hide his curiosity. It wasn't invasive. It was measured, patient, but it was there. One evening after back-to-back meetings stretched past sunset, Elena stayed late to revise a campaign timeline. Cole stepped into the room just as she closed her laptop. She looked up, surprised to see him alone. "Working? Late?" he asked. She nodded, brushing a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "Deadlines don't respect dinner plans." He chuckled quietly, then leaned against the edge of the table. "You've been different lately." She froze for a half-second before replying, "Different how?" He shrugged. "Quieter, tired, not like you." Her tone sharpened slightly. "Maybe I'm just busy. Happens in client work." He nodded slowly, then met her eyes. "You sure? That's all it is?" The silence that followed was thick. Elena broke it with a tight smile. "We're professionals, Mr. Warren. Whatever you're implying, I'd prefer we focus on the pitch." He didn't respond right away. Just studied, her face with a kind of patience that felt almost too gentle. "Right," he said finally. "Of course." She left the room without another word, heels clicking a little too fast against the hallway floor. Over the next few days, she doubled down on the project. Woke earlier, worked longer, skipped meals without noticing. Her assistant, Riley, offered coffee and soft reminders to breathe. Elena brushed them off with a polite nod. She was pushing through. That's what she'd always done. But her body had different plans. It was during a presentation run-through with her team that the room began to blur slightly. At first she thought it was the overhead lights, too bright. Then came the subtle sway of the floor beneath her feet. Riley noticed her pale face a second before it happened. Elena's voice caught mid-sentence, her hands trembling slightly, as the tablet in her grip tilted. She stumbled forward a step, reaching for the edge of the table but missed it. Riley was already calling her name, and then the edges of everything dimmed. She woke up on the leather couch in the office lounge, her shoes off and a damp cloth pressed to her forehead. Riley hovered nearby, phone in hand, looking half-panicked. But it wasn't Riley who sat next to her. It was Cole. His suit jacket was draped over the armrest, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened. "Hey," he said quietly as her eyes fluttered open. "You fainted." She tried to sit up, but he gently pressed her shoulder back. "Take it slow." She looked around, suddenly self-conscious. "You didn't have to—" He cut her off. "Riley called me, said she couldn't get a ride fast enough. I was already in the building." She closed her eyes, groaning. "Great. Just what I need. My client playing chauffeur." He ignored the sarcasm. "You haven't been eating," he said flatly. "And you've been pushing too hard. This isn't just work stress, Elena." She turned her face away. "I'm fine." He reached for a water bottle and handed it to her. "No, you're not." His tone was soft but firm. "I've seen people burn out before. This isn't that. Something's going on." She stared at the floor, her grip tightening around the bottle. The silence between them stretched again. Then, in a voice barely louder than a breath, she said, "I didn't want this to happen." Cole didn't move. "What happened?" She looked at him then, really looked, her eyes darker than usual, guarded but not cold. "I'm pregnant." He blinked, but his posture didn't shift. There was no sudden reaction, no dramatic gasp, just stillness. "And?" he asked quietly. Her gaze didn't waver. "It's yours." The room felt impossibly quiet. Even the hum of the city outside seemed to vanish. Cole sat back slightly as if absorbing the weight of her words. He didn't ask how. He didn't ask if she was sure. He just looked at her with something in his expression she hadn't seen before. Something too complex to name. And Elena, still holding that water bottle, still pale and exhausted, realized she'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross. Cole didn't say anything at first. He sat there beside her on the couch, watching her as if she were speaking another language. His fingers interlocked in front of him, elbows resting on his knees. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady. "Are you keeping it?" Elena didn't flinch. "Yes." The word came without hesitation. She didn't owe him a debate. She wasn't looking for permission. Still, she held her breath in the silence that followed, not sure what she expected from him. He nodded slowly, the motion deliberate, controlled. "All right," he said. "Whatever you need, doctor, support, time off, I'll make it happen." She looked away, already shaking her head. "I don't need anything from you." He turned, his head slightly, watching her like he was trying to read through the cracks. "It doesn't have to mean anything more than it does," he said carefully, "but I want to be responsible for what's mine." Elena's jaw tensed. "This isn't about responsibility. This is my life and I'll handle it." Her tone wasn't angry, but it was immovable. She had spent years building walls she could manage. Letting someone in now, especially someone like Cole, meant giving up control, and that was something she wasn't ready for. The days that followed were tight with unspoken tension. Their meetings continued. The project advanced. Deadlines approached. They stood next to each other in boardrooms, exchanged files, edited slides, and outlined campaign strategy like nothing had changed. But everything had. Their eye contact became brief, calculated. Their small talk evaporated. What once simmered with electricity now felt sharp, clipped. Cole kept his distance, not cold but unsure, hesitant. He didn't want to overstep. She didn't want to let him in. It was a quiet tug-of-war neither of them acknowledged out loud. Behind closed doors, Elena began to feel the weight in ways she hadn't prepared for. She read articles in the middle of the night, scrolled through baby forums in secret tabs, and stared at checklists she couldn't bring herself to start. She answered Riley's questions with half-truths and began turning down social invites. Her body was changing. Her life was tilting, but she still showed up at the office with heels on and her hair done, as if she could outpace the vulnerability inching closer by the day. Cole noticed. Of course he did. He noticed how she cradled her stomach when she thought no one was looking, how her posture had softened, ever so slightly, like she was conserving energy. He wanted to say something more than the neutral phrases they passed between them. Wanted to ask how she was sleeping, if she was scared, what she needed. But every time he tried, she shut the door before he reached it. They weren't fighting, but the silence between them felt heavier than any argument. During one long evening of revisions, they sat across from each other in the conference room, documents spread out on the table. Cole reached for a pen at the same time she did. Their fingers brushed. Neither pulled back immediately. She looked up at him, and for a brief second, there was something in her eyes. Fatigue, maybe, or something deeper. He opened his mouth like he might say something, then closed it again. She turned back to the papers and kept writing. They worked late into the night, without speaking again. By the end of the week, the project was nearing its final pitch phase. Pressure mounted. Investors were being prepped. A national rollout loomed. Elena poured herself into the numbers, the strategy, the branding, anything but what was growing inside her. She didn't tell anyone about the appointment. It was easier that way. No one to ask questions, no one to offer sympathy. She took a cab alone, her hands clenched tightly in her lap the entire ride. The clinic was quiet. Neutral paint on the walls, soothing instrumental music playing through ceiling speakers. The nurse smiled gently, offered her a gown, and helped her onto the table. The room was dimly lit, cool, sterile. She breathed in through her nose and out through her mouth like the nurse suggested. Then the technician entered, adjusted the monitor, and began the scan. The screen flickered to life, and there it was. Small, not much more than a flicker of movement, but alive. Real. Elena stared, her lips parting slowly. For the first time in weeks, her chest loosened. Her eyes welled. Her fingers gripped the edge of the table, not out of fear, but awe. She didn't speak for a long moment. Then, so softly it was almost soundless, she whispered, "Hi." The technician smiled quietly beside her, saying nothing. The image continued to pulse on the screen, and Elena just watched, her breath catching in her throat. It was no longer about plans or control. It was about what had already begun. Applause echoed through the event hall as Elena stepped down from the stage, her heels clicking softly against the polished wood, a subtle flush rising in her cheeks. The final pitch had landed, seamlessly, confidently, and the room full of investors had responded with approval. She'd done it. Her campaign had not only been greenlit, it had been celebrated. And through all the flashbulbs and handshakes, Cole stood at the edge of the crowd, his presence quiet but firm. He hadn't said a word during the presentation, hadn't hovered or stepped in. He'd simply watched. When the final signature was made and the announcement confirmed, he let her take every ounce of the spotlight. At the after-party, laughter and champagne filled the room. Elena stood near the buffet table, sipping sparkling water while her colleagues toasted and recounted favorite moments from the past month. She wasn't the type to linger in crowds, but tonight felt earned. As she listened to two junior associates chat behind her, a thread of conversation caught her ear. "I heard Cole walked away from a $100 million settlement after his father died. Something about not wanting to fight his sister in court. No surprise. He's always been like that. Detached. You know he's never had a real relationship? Never even lived with someone. He's the type who stays in penthouses and sends flowers through assistants." Elena didn't turn around. She just stood there, glass in hand, something shifting inside her. The words weren't said with malice. They were just facts, passed around like trivia. But they landed hard. For weeks, she had seen him as the man who might interfere, who might take control, who might change her path. But what if he was just as unsure, just as guarded? Maybe he wasn't standing at a distance because he didn't care. Maybe it was because he didn't know how to step closer. Later that evening, after the speeches and toasts and confetti had settled, Elena stepped outside to breathe. The air was cooler than she expected, crisp against her skin. She wrapped her arms around herself and stared out at the city skyline. Footsteps approached from behind, and she didn't have to look to know it was him. Cole stopped a few feet away, hands in his pockets, his jacket open. "Nice speech," he said. She didn't respond. Just let the silence stretch. He moved closer but didn't touch her. "You were brilliant in there," he added. "You earned every bit of it." She finally turned to face him. "Why didn't you say anything? During the pitch, the follow-up?" He shrugged slightly. "It was yours. I didn't need to be in the way." They stood there for a moment before his tone changed. "Can I tell you something?" She gave a small nod. He took a breath. "I lost my mom when I was 17. Cancer. Quick. Unexpected. My dad was never really present after that. I guess that's where the detachment started. His voice was steady, but low. After she passed, I just stopped getting close to people. It was easier to succeed than to connect. Elena watched him carefully. He wasn't performing. This wasn't a calculated confession. This was raw, stripped-down truth. Cole glanced away, then back. I never thought about fatherhood. I didn't think I'd be good at it. I figured, if I didn't start anything real, I wouldn't fail anyone. She looked at him, arms still folded tightly. This doesn't change anything, she said quietly. I'm still doing this alone. He nodded slowly, not disappointed, just accepting. It could, he said, if you let it. She didn't answer, didn't move. He gave her one last look, then stepped back and walked toward the door. She stayed outside long after he left. When she got home, her apartment felt unusually still. She set her purse on the table, kicked off her shoes, and loosened her hair from its clip. It wasn't until she opened her bag to grab her phone that she saw it. An envelope, plain, folded once, her name written in his handwriting. Elena stood there for a moment, staring at it. Then she picked it up, opened the flap, and pulled out a single page. The handwriting was neat, deliberate. Elena, I didn't know how to say all this without it sounding rehearsed, so I wrote it instead. I know I haven't made this easy. I've kept a distance because it's what I've always done. It's the only thing I know how to do when I'm scared. I'm not asking to change your plans. I'm not asking you to depend on me. But I do want to be here. Not just as someone who signs checks or sits in meetings. I want to be present for whatever version of this life you'll allow me into. You don't owe me anything. But if you ever find space for me in this story, I won't waste it. Cole. She read it twice, then folded the letter carefully, pressing the crease flat. Her eyes lingered on the signature for a long time. It wasn't a promise. It wasn't pressure. Just an invitation. Quiet. Waiting. Elena sat on the edge of her bed, the letter from Cole still resting in her lap. The paper had softened at the folds from how many times she'd opened it, stared at it, folded it again. She had expected control, confidence, maybe even a polished pitch for why he should be involved. But the letter wasn't any of that. It was honest, careful, hesitant in a way that made it feel real. He hadn't asked for forgiveness. He hadn't asked for a relationship. He'd only asked for a place, one that she could define. A part of her had waited to feel resentment or panic, but instead all she felt was stillness, the kind that followed exhaustion, the kind that made space. She texted him a single line. "Dinner tomorrow?" He replied within minutes. "Any place, any time. Just say when." They met at a small Italian restaurant on the west side, one with low lighting, and mismatched tablecloths that felt too personal to be business. Elena arrived first, scanning the room like it might shift under her feet. When Cole entered, he didn't wear his usual sharp suit. Just a dark sweater, slacks, and that same quiet focus in his eyes. He greeted her with a small smile, and she nodded. No hugs, no pleasantries, just two people with too much between them to pretend it was simple. They ordered, but neither touched the menus. The waiter came and went without interrupting the silence. Then Cole leaned slightly forward, resting his forearms on the table. "Thank you for meeting me." Elena looked at him, hands folded around her water glass. "You didn't push. That matters." He exhaled, shoulders relaxing slightly. "I didn't want this to be about pressure or guilt. I wanted to be known. Even if the answer's still no." She shook her head slowly. "It's not no. I don't know what it is yet." He nodded. Then, after a pause, he asked, "What do you need from me? Not as the father, as me, Cole." Elena stared at him, caught off guard by the question. No one had ever asked her that without expecting something in return. She looked down for a moment, searching her thoughts like they were written on the linen napkin in her lap. When she finally looked back up, her voice was quiet. "I don't know," she said honestly. "But I don't want to do this alone anymore." Cole didn't react with a smile or a speech. He simply reached across the table, palm open, not reaching. For hers, just anchoring himself there. A gesture that didn't demand anything, just made space. Elena placed her fingers over his. Not interlocked, not held, just resting. They stayed like that for a moment, and it felt like breathing again for the first time in weeks. Their food arrived, and they talked. Not about the baby, not about the logistics or the future, just about themselves. He told her about growing up in hotel rooms and private schools where no one remembered your name past the semester. She shared stories of late nights in grad school, hustling freelance jobs while the world assumed she was handed everything because she wore confidence like armor. They didn't try to fix anything. They just listened. As the night wore on, the restaurant emptied, and laughter from another table faded into background hum. Cole looked at her as the waiter brought the check and asked, "So, what now?" Elena considered it, then gave a small shrug. "Now? We leave. We go home. And tomorrow, maybe we have lunch." He smiled faintly. "Just lunch?" She tilted her head. "One step at a time. You said that, remember?" He nodded. "I meant it." They walked out side by side. He didn't offer to drive her. She didn't offer to stay longer. There were no grand gestures or long goodbyes. Just a shared understanding that something had shifted. Not fixed, not defined, but shifted. And for now, that was enough. The seasons changed, and so did the rhythm of Elena's life. Mornings were slower now, filled with vitamins, fruit smoothies, and an expanding collection of stretch-friendly clothes. Her stomach curved outward with each passing week, unmistakably pregnant, undeniably radiant. Work continued, but she made space. For naps, for breath, for Cole. He showed up more than she expected. Not with flowers or promises, but with action. He drove her to appointments, sat quietly in waiting rooms, asked thoughtful questions about heartbeats and nutrient levels. He researched strollers like a man preparing for a product launch, sent her links at 2 a.m. with side-by-side comparisons and user reviews. At first, she rolled her eyes. Then she started reading them. Her apartment began to reflect the shift. Baby books stacked in corners, gentle creams by the sink, tiny socks in drawers she used to keep empty. One afternoon, Cole came over with something different, not practical, not medical. A simple black frame with a white mat. Inside it, a soft pastel logo. Her name, stylized, elegant. Elena Warren. She looked at it, brow raised, amused. "Jumping ahead, aren't you?" He shrugged, a crooked grin playing at his lips. "You already carry the name that matters." She laughed. Not the practiced kind she used at meetings or social events, but something real and light. It stayed with her for hours. When the first contractions hit, it was past midnight. The city, outside her window, pulsed with distant traffic and muted lights. She didn't panic. She didn't scroll through contacts. She called Cole, not out of obligation, not because he had to be there, but because he was the first person who came to mind. He picked up on the first ring, and she didn't need to explain. He was already grabbing his keys. At the hospital, he stayed close but gave her space. When she needed silence, he didn't fill it. When she needed pressure against her lower back, he was there. When the nurse offered her another hand to hold, she reached for his without hesitation. His grip was firm but not overwhelming, steady, grounding. Hours passed. Pain rose and broke like waves, but through it all, he stayed with her. Kneeling beside the bed, brushing damp hair from her forehead, whispering calm into the noise. And when the moment came, when her daughter entered the world with a cry that cracked the air and made everything else stop, Cole looked at her like he'd never seen anything so powerful. Or so fragile. Tears welled in his eyes, unhidden. He didn't speak right away. Just watched as the nurse placed the baby on Elena's chest, tiny and pink, her lungs loud and strong. Elena stared down, her body exhausted, her heart flooded with something bigger than she could name. She glanced at Cole and their eyes met. No words. Just connection. Later in the quiet of the recovery room, the lights dimmed. Cole stood beside her, gently rocking their daughter in his arms. She was swaddled in soft hospital linen, her face peaceful, her breaths shallow and rhythmic. He looked down at her like she was a secret he hadn't known he was missing. Elena watched him, her body aching, her soul strangely calm. "You changed everything," he said quietly, still looking at the child. Elena didn't reply. She didn't need to. The truth was already in the room, wrapped in a blanket, held in the arms of a man who never thought he'd be here. And beside them, a woman who once believed she'd do it all alone, now resting in the comfort of something she hadn't planned for, but had chosen moment by moment, step by step. Sometimes, one night is all it takes to rewrite every name you thought you'd carry alone. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more cinematic emotional stories.